Okay, good morning. Continuing along on page 56 of 569 of the Hemshech Tzadik Dal 5694, which is corresponding, as I pointed out yesterday, to the bottom of a page 1147, top of 1148 in Ayin Beis, volume 2. And we've entered now, after a relatively longer discussion on the levels of desire. Again, the whole evolution, the process from the source and how it manifests first from a state which is just pashut, meaning something that doesn't have any shape, form, and any form of expression, but it's ready a mitzias nimtza into a rotzen that is called now a rotzen klali, a general desire, called power of desire, concealed desire, machshava. Bottom line, a determination that comes, that results from a shakavitaria, a deliberation, so a determination that this is worthy of being desired. But there's no active pursuit and there's no engaging and no relating to the thing that is desired. Then comes a state what's called Ratzon Gali, the revealed desire, or what other words did he use? Ratzon Mamish, actual desire, sinner, channel, that is actively relating to and pursuing and in a state of being drawn to the objective. And this is all before the tzimtzum, remember, in levels of highest levels of oir. And now the last thing, now he's bringing it back and saying that though it's a makif, because Ratzon is always a makif. Ratzon is not a pnimi. Ratzon is above. I desire something. A pnimi is relating to the thing that you desire and you're activating, whether it's seichel or midas, intelligence or emotions. So desire, you desire to use your intelligence, but a pnimi is the immanent and internalized faculty. So though Ratzon is a makif, nevertheless, he says, it still has levels in it. That was the last point we made, which goes back to the Ayin Beis, where he began the whole discussion, because we want to have levels. When we're talking about a yesh, ayin yesh, that there's yesh amiti, atzmus, the source of it all, the essential and absolute existence of atzmus, and yesh anivra, which is the created yesh, the existing created product, the producer and the product, and you have in between a channel, which is called ayin, which splits into two. The ayin that relates to atzmus, ayin amiti, and the ayin that relates to existence. So you see from that, the reason you need the channel is because an etzem is beyond our relationship with it. We can have a relationship with the oir and through the oir to the etzem. So the oir is subject to the levels. That was the whole point he began. Oir, not etzem, because oir is ispashtus, it's an extension. So he's explaining now the rotzen, which emerges in the air, also has levels in it. But here comes the question, it doesn't pose it as a question, but here's the dilemma. How does something that's makif, that's removed, have any form of structure in it when it's beyond structure? Pnimi, its whole definition is hierarchy. Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes. But Ratzon is an equal Ratzon in everything. It's God's, it's desire of the nefesh, or Lamaila, the desire of God's desire. So he's explained that there's a paradox in this Ratzon. That's what we learned on the bottom of page 55, in chapter 17 into 56. So I'm summing up what we learned. That Ratzon doesn't have a keli, doesn't have any particular location, doesn't have any particular function even. It's a general desire. Whatever you want to desire, that comes from desire. But kol mokim, nevertheless, even though it's a makrim, it divides into the two levels of Ratzon, which are with two levels that also have in them also levels, which we're not getting into. And one is a general desire, yes, and then the other comes into Ratzon Prati, that he says has a tzir, is now identifying with and relating and even pursuing the specifics of what this desire is. To the point that he says that at times, due to the precision of fulfilling all the details of the desire down to the iota, every iota, kol prati is b'sifeim, every subcategory, every detail. So it's sometimes called Ritzeinish Pratim, specific desires. In other words, a desire is defined and defined by specifics because there are details in the desire. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says that's a dover v'yifuche, which means a paradox essentially. It's something and it has two opposites. One from one end, mitzad echad. I'm reading the bottom literally, and I'm turning the page. If the desire encompasses every detail, and if one detail, even specifics that are not that vital even, are not fulfilled, the whole Ratzon is not fulfilled. It's not a Ratzon Shalom. You can't say that my desire was fulfilled. I wanted a home with all these details. If details are missing, ain't a Ratzon Shalom. Not only is the part that you did not fulfill not complete, but even the part you did fulfill, you didn't finish the job. It was one Ratzon. I wanted a certain home, and the home is not the way I wanted it. On the other end, there's a difference between primary elements of the desire and secondary. What he calls inyanim ikrim sheberatzon, lo inyanim shem sifim bolvad. Things that are fundamental, necessary, absolutely necessary, or you could say primary, and things that are more subcategories, branches. Use the branches. So so it has a ratzon has both ends to it. There's an element that's an equalizer. It's one desire. That's like more the makif of it. But there's also the element that the ratzon relates to and is fulfilled when you do the specific details. Yeah. And I explained it in many different examples yesterday. I'm not going to go over that. So, and this distinction between the things, he says, is qualitative distinction. Each has its own particular conceptual location, space, as it is in the general difference between the first desire and the second desire. Okay. And now we move to this. All this is an example in the human example for how it is Lamaila. What does this teach us? That the way God did it was also this way. And I'll just read this again. V'adugmehu mizeh Lamaila. I'm reading 10 lines from the top of page 56. Again, if you want to follow the text, go to ayinbeis.com and you have the PDFs there. V'adugmehu mizeh Lamaila. The example of this above, how in other words, how it is in the divine process of creation. The gamba era seviv, also in the transcendent energy of seviv, which is essentially Rotz and Keser and so on. Yesh gam ken chiluki dargis. Even though it's seviv, you could say seviv is a equalizer. It surrounds everything equally. Like when we talk in mitzvahs, a talis. A talis is supposed to be makiv, the whole body, but it doesn't make a distinction. Tzitzis is pnimius. A sukkah is a makiv. The sukkah, when you're sitting in a sukkah, there's no difference between your head and your toes. All of you is sitting in the sukkah. So you could think that seviv is just a so-called encompassing or transcendent energy. No, but there's chiluke dargis in it. There's gamken chiluke. There's levels, like we said with Ratzon. It's not just a Ratzon, I want the whole thing. There's specifics in it. The betchilas amshach, in the beginning of the transmission or the flow, hu b'chinas er klali. The seviv is a er klali, like we said before, Ratzon klali. It's a desire. He determined. And as it extends, or as it flows, or as it manifests and expands or extends more, it becomes a ratzon prati, a more specific desire, like we discussed before. So now, how do you explain it? So he says, "V'tam hadover." The reason for this, and this, as I said, is a yesh shleimer in Ayin Beis. The reason for this is the era seviv bo b'chiluki, the tam hadover, the era seviv bo b'chiluki madregas. The reason that the era seviv, the transcendent energy, though it's above and removed relatively, the reason it comes in different levels, is because the seviv travels. The way it transmits, the process, the actual process of the transmission or the flow of Seviv, it's not an independent track. It travels through the Eir Pnimi. The Eir Pnimi is the channel through which the Eir Seviv manifests and moves into, flows and extends into wherever it's being transmitted to. So it could have been two tracks, Seviv, Mamala, Makif and Pnimi, transcendence and immanence. No, the transcendence travels through the immanence or the internal, which right away tells you, okay, once it travels through there, it assumes some of the properties of the Pnimi, which is the details that we're talking about. Again, this we've discussed at length in Ayin Beis. If this is new to you, you never heard this before, so I would suggest, in case there are questions, I'm happy to answer them, but we discussed this at length when we learned Ayin Beis. So all you have to do is go back and listen to the recording. Just just for the record, those of you not aware of that, every day we have a WhatsApp group called Ayin Beis, and every day we post the audio recording of this program. We will be posting the videos too, but it's all there. So if you want to join the group, just send us your number. You could text it and we'll add you. And if you're already on the group, just go back. And if you joined after these recordings were made, just say, I'd like to have the recording of this and this page, and we're happy to forward it to you. Some technical details here, but it's all available. So we discussed this at length, I guess, around 2 weeks ago.
If you want something specifically, you could just put a search, they say something.
Yeah, just
like
write the page, right? Ayin Beis, page 1147. I've been putting descriptions. Yeah, just do 1147 or 1148, which with this
you
is
have to put a
discussed.
page.
It'll
You
come up.
cannot just say a topic, right?
What's wrong with the page number?
No, if you want some certain topic and you don't know the page, could you say you want this?
If it was titled with that, if it was titled with that topic, yeah, it had to be titled that way. If the title, in the title you have that word, you can search for it. Yeah.
Do you want to announce the number to use for the WhatsApp group?
I don't know the number, to be honest. So if someone wants to say the number, say it, or put it in the chat, whatever.
Thank you.
Okay. So basically, so again, this is literally word for word from Ayin Beis. And so nothing wrong with going over it again. I'm just saying we've talked about this, and I hope your memory is there if you've learned it together. But anyway, I'm going to continue here. What I'm saying is basically I'm going to explain it less than I did initially then. No reason to go through the whole arichas. So he's going to now explain how we see this, a proof from Eitz Chaim, from the Arizal, that demonstrates that Makif works through Pnimi. How do we know? It's going to say a specific source in Eitz Chaim. I want to just say what I said, I'll just repeat this. This is vital. What you see from this is clearly the interface is as interwoven as possible. That even Makif, which on one end really represents more godliness, because it's God's desire, and Pnimi represents more the divine energy manifesting in existence, meaning its focus and function is this functionality to create the specific details of existence. You could say these are two divine energies. They're both divine. Obviously, Hashem hu Elokim. So it's not, God forbid, two different divines. It's one divine energy that has two ways. One is like more of a Ur HaBli Gvul, a type of infinite transcendent energy, and one is an Ur HaGvul, an energy that fits into each specific detail of existence. Hashem hu Elokim, from God's point of view, it's one divine force, like he says in Shayichud V'Amunah. There's Ur and there's Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is Hein Gvureisov. It's God's strengths, it's another faculty. Just as God reveals, God can conceal. When a teacher teaches an idea, and he sees it necessary for him to be mitzamtzim the idea, to contract it, to limit it, because the students have to be paced according to the level of the students. So from the teacher's point of view, as he teaches, the flow, the Gilui HaSeichel and the Helam HaSeichel are one thing. They're both from him, two forces that's necessary. Like we talk about raindrops. The rain is chesed, but it's called gvuras kshamim because you need it to come drop by drop so it can be absorbed. From the perspective of the student, yes, there are things that are more revealed and things less revealed, but it's all one flow. But here he's going deeper. He's saying even the Eir HaBligvul, the Eir HaSeviv, is not just another track. It also travels through the Eir Pnimi. So what the recipient is receiving as the energy of the divine, Elikim, or Koyach HaMamala, Eir HaGvul, that enters into existence according to its Abasara Mamoris Nivra Elam, Yehi Eir, Yehi Rakia, specific. The heaven and light are not the same thing, Eir and Rakia. And then Tetzidesha, vegetation. They're all specific creations with specific divine energy, Eir Pnimi, entering each one of them. And not only is there a transcendent Eir HaBligvul that surrounds, that Eir HaBligvul is also traveling through this Eir Pnimi. So though it remains transcendent, remember, Seviv does not become a Mala. He's not saying the transcendent becomes immanent, but the transcendence also manifests through the immanent. So of course, the interface here then becomes far more intertwined because you have the Eir HaBligvul not just as a separate, which is also powerful because it creates bittul and all the effects it has on us, but it relates even to the Eir Pnimi. So they have a certain interconnection. Similar to when we spoke about how Keser begins to relate to the Sfiras. Remember I talked about 3 levels in Keser, all from the first volume of Ayin Beis. But the point being, the interface becomes more and more intricate and more detailed and more connecting as many levels as possible. So now he gives the proof from Eitz Chaim. He says like this. Ukiyadua. The Gam HaIgulim, this is, and is known, that also the Igulim, which is usually the expression in Kabbalah for Makif or Seviv. So 3 names that are synonymous. Seviv Kalalman, Makif or Makifim, and Igulim or Igul. They all indicate on the transcendent energy. Chassidus, the expression is usually mostly Seviv Kalalman, which is from Zoyar actually. Iu Seviv, Iu Mamala. But just telling you that they're essentially just used in different places. But Chassidus will bring Igulim too, and Igulim and Yesher is Makif and Pnimi, and Seviv and Mala. So he says that Gama Igulim, Igul literally means circles. Circles is the name for the Seviv. That also the Igulim, remember the Igulim that are throughout the Holy Shtalshalos, there's Pnimi and there's Makif. So the Igulim would be this literally like circles, and the Kav would be the line. So there's Igulim of Atzilus, there's Igulim in over Chochmah, there's Igulim of Bina, there's Igulim in every level, there's Igulim. Like for example, the word from the Mittler Rebbe about not sleeping in a sukkah. He says, how could you sleep? Makifim de Bina. Calls the sukkah Makifim de Bina. Bina is a Pnimi. Makifim is a Makif. But he calls it Makifim de Pnimi because sukkah is generally a Makif. But it's the Makif of Bina, not the Makif of Chochmah. So every Pnimi has a Makif, just as a rule. So every internal energy, immanent energy, has a Makif that surrounds it. In the language of more faculty language, human faculties, every object has a desire for it. So you could say the Makifim of Bina is the desire for Bina, the Rotzen for Bina. It's like the Keser of Bina, another way of calling it that. So basically, everything, so we see there's Igulim. So he says, Yedua, it's known, the Igulim, Nimshachim in Akav. Where do they come from? You would think their root is the Igul HaGadol. The first Igul is the one that remained after the Tzimtzum, when the light was concentrated or contracted. So it's called Igul HaGadol. It's like the light that withdrew. So you have a black hole in the middle, but around it is surrounding light. Obviously, this is not physical, conceptual. So that's called the Igul HaGadol. It's the first time there's an Igul, because before that, everything was Erein Sof Pashut Mamala Kol HaMetzias. It was only one big field of energy of divine consciousness. There was no circles and no lines and no nothing. It was all within the divine consciousness. You have the levels we're talking about. As we talked at length earlier, that in truth is they're not really levels. They're only levels in comparison to one another. One rots into the other. But basically, before the tzimtzum, you're talking about pshitus, seamlessness, shapelessness, I would call it basically a shapeless field of energy, if you wish, of divine consciousness. The tzimtzum, which withdrew the conscious presence of this divine consciousness from a certain space to leave room for an independent consciousness to emerge, arise. So what happened to the light? The light turns into an eagle, a makif. And that will be the root of all the makifim and stalshus, but with one important qualification. They won't bypass the kav, they travel through the kav. So the kav is the stream of energy, the light, that flows after the tzimtzum from the Igul HaGadol, and it flows, but the way he says it, using the words, I'll read it inside, the kav nimshach u'misagel, the kav travels or extends, transmits, and misagel turns into a circle. The chezav nimshach, so if you want the picture, it would be a line like look at a paintbrush, a stylus of divine energy that's creating structure and hierarchy, but then it creates a circle, extends a little more, the circle of Ak, or the circle of Chachma of Ak, Keser of Ak, Chachma of Ak, Bina of Ak. So everything has a Pnimi and a Makif, and the Makifim are traveling through the Pnimi, through the Kav. So the Kav represents internalized energy, the Makif represents transcendent energy, and the transcendent travels through the internal. I'll give an example for it in a minute. I just want to read this line. So Chezer the Misagel, the Chezer the
The Igul HaGodel is le'achar hatzimtzum or koidem hatzimtzum. The Igul HaGodel, or Rishon.
I just explained. Before the tzimtzum, there's no Igul HaGodel. There's only one stream of one field of energy. The Igul HaGodel is the light before the tzimtzum that remains after the tzimtzum, remains in a form of an Igul. So in one way, yes, the Igul HaGodel is only after the tzimtzum, but it's a light from before the tzimtzum that remains after the, so to speak, in a state of Igul after the tzimtzum. In Ayin Samach Vav, Adam Kiyakir, he talks about different ways you understand the Igul HaGodel. Did the tzimtzum affect it? Did the tzimtzum not affect it? Okay.
In which Maimel?
Adam Kiyakir Samach Vav. The Meshum Zeh
If
Ein
we have
Ademe
to say the
Igulei
Kav
Ach,
also
Igulei
starts,
Atik Va'arich.
then
Due
you
to
have to,
this,
don't you
What?
have to say the Kav starts at just before the Tzimtzum to bring down everything? The Kav?
the Kav starts only after the Tzimtzum. That's the language in Eitz Chaim. After the Tzimtzum, Chozar V'himshich Kav V'dak Kotzar.
Where does the Kav
Kav
sit?
is post-Tzimtzum, not pre-Tzimtzum.
Oh, okay, but then where does the energy from the Kav come from? The Igul HaGadol?
Yeah, but there has to be a pause before it begins to flow. It's not, there's the whole question Chassidus we learned in Ayin Beis. Why didn't he just leave a Kav? Why did he have to completely conceal? He should have just left the stream.
The Siluk.
A complete silence.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
So the Kav Nimshach Misagel, V'chezev and Nimshach Misagel, the Kav extends, circle, and then it continues. The Nimshach continues further, Umisagel, and makes another circle. The Mishum Zeh, due to this, Eina Demi Gule Akli Gule Atik V'arich. Because of this, you cannot compare one eagle to another eagle. Though they're all eagle, they're all circles, they're all transcendent, but their difference, the Gule of Adam Kadman, meaning the Makif of Adam Kadman, you can't compare to the Makifim of Atik and Arich. Hainu b'chinas Keser d'Atzilus. That's Keser of Atzilus, Atik and Arich. The Igulei Ak, all this again is word for word from Ayin Beis, page 1148. The Igulei Ak, hu shemakifim klolos ha'elamis, v'heim b'chinas havdalah min ha'elamis. We talk about the Igulei Ak, he's just explaining the difference. They are encompassing and transcending the general, the whole, all the worlds. And they are removed from the worlds. Ulechein hine efem pulosam be'in habitl shehu behelam, and that's why the way they impact on existence is through bittul. It causes existence to feel a sense of awe and a sense of, in a positive way, nothingness, which is a concealed effect. It's not a revealed effect. It's just sensing something beyond us. It's a transcendent feeling. It's not felt in Nivraim. Why? Because this Igulim Avak is a makif that's very much removed from existence. Again, all from Ayin Beis. As discussed elsewhere, everything that stands prostrates itself before you, meaning bittul. Basically, everything that exists stands in a state of awe before you. That comes from a bittul. We learned about this in volume 1 and second half of volume 1 in Ayin Beis. That the effect of the bligvul, because it's beyond us, it evokes a feeling of beyond. It's not relative to us, so we feel something's beyond us.
Is he relating also to our world that it's behelem, everything is bottled? Iguleak is kol oilames?
But pashtus, yeah. When a person senses some existential state of awe, you just feel there's something more than you are. There's something out there, something bigger than us. That is coming from Igulim of Ak. I could refer to you in volume 1. There's a few chapters he talks about this at length. The Iguli HaKeser of Atik and Arich, the Igulim of Keser, the Makir, the transcendent of Keser, Hein Makifim dat Silus Befrat. They're not a Makif, they're not a transcendent energy that creates a bittul in all the worlds. It's specifically the Keser of Atzilus. It's not the Keser of Akudim or of higher levels. For Eifim Pu'lasam, and their manner of affecting that level, it also creates bittul, but it's more sensed. It's a state of revealed and more palpable. Okay. So basically what he's saying here is that the different makifim have different effects, which tells you that the makifim are different. So even though makif you would think is an equalizer, remember all this is to come to explain how in Seviv there are levels, how in Rotzen there are levels. They're not like the levels in Pnimi, but they're levels. Before I continue, which is actually the next 3 lines is an addition, 4 lines is an addition from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Let me explain it with a few examples to make this a little easier. So, because as you said, I say every class, this isn't mathematical and this isn't mechanical. This is all personal, avoidadik. So let's just use a few examples here. Let's start with the artist. My favorite example with the artist. We know that before there was any art, and before there was even the artist knowing he's an artist, there was a state of, let's call it a person who's not even aware that they know they're an artist. They definitely do not have any sense of it and definitely don't have a desire for it. There comes then a state, they become aware. I'm aware I have the skill and I have the interest creating art. Okay, there's a determination that you're going to create art, heskim. Then goes further, not just a heskim and a hechlet that you determine you're actually going to do it. You start pursuing it. You start making plans. The desire is now in an active state. Okay, what do I need? What resources I need? All the different levels we've learned. Shir asmei b'koyach. You start the process. What kind of art? You start envisioning it. What will I need to make that type of art? The details we said. You're actually envisioning art. in the language Lamaila, the Esesphiris is God's artistry. Those are the 10 components he's going to use to create all of existence. Okay, so now the artist has turned into a Ratzon that's Nimshach, a Ratzon, like a Tziner, actually pursuing. And the next step, of course, is going to be the creation of the art. He's ready. It's going to be a canvas, paint, brush. And he's beginning to implement it all. Now, in this process, there's a few things going on. I'm going to talk about two main ones. One is the Ratzon for it, the desire. That's, of course, the overriding force that's driving the whole process. Take away the desire, nothing's happening. If this artist is not self-aware that he's an artist and wants to create art, nothing's going to happen. Doesn't matter how talented he is. It doesn't matter how many resources he has. There's no process. So you must have Ratzon. Ratzon has in it two aspects to it. One is it's an equalizer. He knows he wants to create a horizon. He's going to create a beautiful horizon with a sunset and birds and water and bushes and you know, the whole thing. And he has it all envisioned. So on one hand, there's a Ratzon that is an equalizer, that everything that he's envisioning is now in his mind. He's imagining it. And that imagination, that envisioning is going to be, he's going to then commit that to a canvas. He's going to paint what he envisions. The other end of it is that it's not just a vision of the whole horizon, there's actually detailed details. When he paints the sky, he's going to need blue and white. When he paints the sun, he's going to need different colors. And every detail is necessary in the whole picture. So his Ratzon, we're not even talking about painting yet. We're not talking about drawing. We're talking all in his Ratzon state, the Ratzon Prati. So he has a bunch of things. He has, on the other hand, if he only focuses on the details and forgets the big picture, it's not going to look very good, this piece of art, because it all has to be coordinated. The sky, the birds, the sun, the vegetation, whatever, the grass. So his Ratzon consists of two sides. One is the full picture, and the second is the specific details and how they speak to each other. Both are necessary. Now, so right there you see that Ratzon, not just when he actually creates the art, his desire, meaning the whole desire of the whole thing, has every detail in there. It's not implemented yet. Now comes implementation. Implementation, you can say, is post-Tzimtzum. Till this was pre-Tzimtzum in the artist. Why? Because it's all going on within his own mind, with his own desire, within his own imagination. No one knows about it. No one would, unless he told somebody, it would remain always concealed. And if for whatever reason he wouldn't end up doing it, you wouldn't even know that all this was going through his mind and through his will and so on. Now comes step 2, action time. We have to begin. How do you begin? He can't be sitting and ruminating over it in his meditations. He needs to get up, go to a canvas, and he needs specifics. He needs paint, he needs a brush, he needs all these details. It's all being driven by and guided by the artistic vision and everything I just described. Without that, you don't have the next step. But implementation is equally important here because that's the bottom line, the creation process. So what happens now? Now there has to be a tzimtzum. He can't allow his whole flow of his vision to overwhelm, because when he's focusing on doing he begins, he has to have a little brush with a dot, a drop, the right color, the right shape, the right stroke. There's no time here now to say, I got the whole picture, because the whole picture will overwhelm the little details. So he has to have a very specific flow. If he uses a too thick of a brush, or he doesn't even use a brush, he starts just splattering paint all over the canvas, that's not going to create his vision. His vision is specifics, which will have a complete picture, but it's driven by specifics. So he needs a paintbrush that's very precise and very specific. I mean, you usually see by artists, what do they have? Their easel. They have many different paintbrushes, actually. We're going to focus on one, but the point is, it needs to be, the instrument has to be commensurate and tailored to what you're building. If you use a big fat brush and you want to get a little thin line, it's not going to happen. So this would be his kav. This is his kav. This is his so-called writing utensil or drawing utensil instrument, and it's very specific. It's a line. It's not a Blickvoldic energy. It's not it's very limited, but it's drawing light. It's not darkness. It's very specific. It's creating something. It's not a piece of metal that doesn't carry the paint. Whatever is in his vision is being channeled now through the kav. Now, while he's painting the details, of course he's aware of the big picture. He's just not allowing it to overwhelm, because right now he has to focus, but it's always being informed by the big picture. And the other way around as well. His so-called Ratzon Kloli and Ratzon Prati, let's talk more the Ratzon Prati. His desire that he envisioned before he began the process, before he started using the kav, is also informed by the specifics, because he wants the specifics. Now the kav is implementing it. So the kav is really doing two things, his paintbrush. One is it's actually painting each detail, but at the same time, it's also implementing and connecting with and expressing the desire for these details, and vice versa. This desire, which is like basically the driving force, is traveling through his paintbrush. His limited paintbrush is the force that carries not just the details, but also the equalizer of the whole vision of the art. Now, you and I may not see it. When you see him make a little blade of grass, you'll say, okay, blade of grass. But the fact of the matter is that blade of grass is a detail in a whole Ratzon, in a whole vision that was already envisioned by him before. It's not just a disconnected detail. So basically what you have here is both are working together. The big picture, the Ratzon, is traveling through the kav, through the paintbrush, and going and creating every detail, and every detail is informed by the big picture and coordinated with it. Like I said before, it's not just, he can't just say to another person, hey, I want on my canvas, I want to have grass, a sun, a sky, a horizon, whatever. If no one knows his vision, they'll just, what are they going to do? They'll put a sun, a blade, some grass, some sky. It'll look like ridiculous. Disjointed pieces. You want to have one picture, one beautiful picture that's made up of details. So the big picture is informed by the Ratzon. The details is informed by the kav. But the kav also carries the big picture through the details. So at the end of the day, if you think of the whole picture, you say, okay, there's details, the pnimi. The details are also drawing through the details, the makif, which is the Ratzon. His desire is traveling through them. And it's all being informed by the Ratzon as it all began before he even began the process. That's an analogy that I would use to explain a lot of what we said here. Is it a perfect analogy? No. I'm sure if you start picking it apart, you're going to find things that are not exact. But the point is that overall, that's the picture. So that's how God did it. It's a very organized and very actually eloquent system. It's not just a bunch of things going on. And when you understand that, you can really also understand the amazing, miraculous symmetry and synchronicity of the human body. Look at the human body. On one hand, look how many systems there are, how many details, how many cells in the trillions, 30, 75 trillion cells, who knows? They have systems, organs. If you saw them separate, you would never know they can come together. And look how they work together. So someone would ask you, what is driving the human nature, the natural, healthy human body? Is it a makif, a Ratzon that coordinates everything, or is it details and the specifics? The answer would be both. You need both. If you only have one equalizer, you don't have the details. The heart is not the brain. And the same thing the other way around, if you only have the details, you don't have some type of coordinator, like a conductor of a symphony, you're not gonna have harmony. You'll have, God forbid, chaos or worse. So bottom line is, the process, and this is what we're discussing, how did this come to be, is that the kav, which is the equivalent of what I described, the brush, that is able to create details because it's a kav, it's not a circle. It's not, a circle is an equalizer. You need a kav to create details. You need the specifics. So that is carrying also the makif travels through it. So you have the big picture and the small picture all speaking to each other as the process goes. The same example you can use if you want, a teacher and a student. A teacher has the picture in his mind. He knows what he's going to teach, hopefully. So he has the picture. But when he's teaching students, he can't just give them the whole picture. He has to give them bite size, spoon fed, step by step. What are we going to learn today? We're going to learn the first piece, then the second piece. While he's teaching the pieces, if you ask the teacher, of course he knows how these pieces are part of the bigger picture, because that's the rotzen that encompasses them all, the makif. And then there's the actual details. One more thing I would add is that every detail has its own makif. So you don't just have a big picture and a small picture, even the small picture, even the small details also have the detail and the so-called the rotzen for that detail, which of course connects to the rotzen of other details, and together they become one bigger picture, just to fill in the last gap that there's in makifim itself, there's levels, depending on which level of existence you're dealing with, it's Ak or Atzilus or the other levels. Now, if anybody wants to ask anything, feel free.
Oh, yes, if you don't mind. It sounds like there has to be a makif before the panimi and then a new makif after the panimi. In general, you want a detail and then you figure it out. And then the makif, the ratzon for that takes a different shape.
Can you use my example and tell me what you mean in simple English and logic instead of mathematics?
You want to make a bird sitting on a tree. Okay. So now you sit down and figure it out, figure it through in detail. So now that makif, that one of the birds sitting on the tree now has all that detail. We return to the makif. Is that correct? We have a makif before and after each
I don't know about after. Why after? It's a rotzen that was implemented into a pnimi. The rotzen to make the bird on the tree, and then he actually makes the bird on the tree.
It's like his kavos all together.
I'm answering you. I said there's the desire specific. There's a desire for the whole picture.
Yes.
Okay, that's like then there's a desire right now to make a bird on a tree. So there's a rotzen, that's a makiv. And then you actually paint with the kav, you paint the bird. That's the primi. What other makif are we talking about here?
Sounded like there's a makif in particular. And then you think it through and work out all the details. And so now
and that's it. What's next?
Okay. Then does it go back to the desire to have what you've now figured out? Is that
you desired it and you implemented it. Why are you going back to the makif?
I was asking. I wondered if you have to. Okay, you have to have that makif there again to carry it out, because we're saying you have.
The makif doesn't carry out. Pnimi carries out.
We're defining. We defined it in previous class. We defined that the panimi precedes the makif. You have the hamshacha.
Can you give it to me in the example so we can talk that I understand? I can't speak words about things, but give me I gave an example now. Where do you see what you're saying in the example?
I think I'll have to think it over a bit before I ask that in that way. Let me think.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
Can I ask, can you give an example from a teacher to a student with makif and pnimi using your example?
Yeah, sure. I use makif in a few ways. I'll spell it out here in the teacher. The teacher is going to teach, let's say, Tzadik Dalet or Ayin Beis. There's a whole picture. It's not just a bunch of details. There's a picture. He's going to teach about the interface between the divine existence, whatever it may be. This could be about anything. Or teacher is going to teach Hilchas Shabbos. So there's certain general principles. What is Shabbos? Then comes the actual students. So first of all, the teacher in his own mind has to prepare it all. He knows the big picture. So that's like, okay, he knows that the pictures consist of details. So essentially the ratzon to teach, and it encompasses a dover v'yifuchi, like he said here, two opposites. On one hand is an overall desire to teach and an overall picture of what he's going to teach. And then there's the specifics, which exact halachas, how to teach it according to each student, etc. Then comes the actual teaching. So what's happening when he's teaching? He is beginning with Sif Aleph, Siman Aleph, the Hilchos Shabbos, Siman Kuf, whatever the Siman begins, Kuf, whatever it is. Okay, he begins to teach, and he's teaching a detail. The student only knows the detail, doesn't know the big picture yet. The teacher knows the big picture because it's there. except it's concealed right now. The student may even sense there's a bigger picture, and that's why there's a state of awe, because he senses there's a lot more here that I don't get. So what you have here is a tzimtzum. This teacher has now basically concealed the whole, everything he has the desire for, including the big picture and so on, and began to spoon feed. This is what the kav does. The kav starts as sparsas, aleph, beis, gimel. Obviously not those letters, but that's a process, step by step. Each detail has in it a pnimi. What pnimi is what the student can understand. The teacher is teaching something, and it's tailored and commensurate and proportionate to the recipient. No different than when you feed a child. If you feed them with a spoon this size, it won't work. It has to be spoon-fed. You put a little food, you're going to feed them a whole meal, but it's going to take a while, and you put enough that the student can digest and internalize. In that pnimi that you are giving, there's much more, of course. There's, first of all, it's informed by the big picture. Even though that spoon doesn't necessarily, you don't see it, but it's informed. So the kav is informed by the big picture. On the other hand, the other way around is that the big picture is now is transmitting through the kav, through the spoon. So as you're telling your student a detail, that detail carries with it also the seviv, the makif of the bigger picture and the bigger desire of the whole picture. So essentially, the student is receiving two things at least. What the student understands, that's internalized, and student can go away and say, today I learned Sif Aleph. I learned chapter 16 or 17 in Sadi Dalet. I got it. Someone will say, do you get the whole thing? No, I didn't learn the whole thing yet. I learned what I learned. Is it embedded in there? Of course it's embedded. It's concealed, however. So as you learn more and more, then each case you start seeing the bigger picture. But there's always a panimi and a makif. That's why when you leave a good class, you'll always feel there are things I understand, and the things remain above my head. And each level has its own makif and panimi, because in each case, like tomorrow, what was today beyond you, you may be able to internalize. And now there are things that remain above you that are still elusive or still not accessible. That would be the example, which is very similar to the artist example. Essentially, just think of the process of any good communication, any good education, even love. When you love someone, you can't overwhelm them. Love has to be given commensurate to the person who's receiving it. You give somebody too much and they can't contain it, it ends up being destructive, actually. It's not even love. So it's all about a measure. Kav, by the way, is kav hamida. It's called the kav that measures. It's a measuring instrument. So it's like, it's like having a paintbrush that has a way to make sure that the flow is very consistent, not too much and not too little. So it's essentially, you're measuring it, and the makif is what is informing it and also being affected by it, because as you teach the details, the makif is also relative to those details. That's what he says, that the igulim are nimshach through the kav. So the kav is informed by the igulim, and the igulim are informed by the kav, basically.
And then that's wonderful. Then when koim inish adata the rabbi, it means that the Talmud is able to, through the pnimi, be able to reach the makif.
Exactly right. That which was makif, and even the makif kloli. Remember, koim inish adata the rabbi is after 40 years.
Right.
But even after a year, or even after a day, you start accessing some makif. But there's a stage when you get to 40 years that you really get a sense like the whole big makif, or the big picture. They literally can understand Dati the Rabbi in a more profound way. It's more than just, it's a new paradigm in a way. And how often has it happened that you learn things and then one day you snap your finger, epiphany, and say, now I get it. What did you get till now? Till now you got details, you understood it. I'm not saying you didn't, but then suddenly you realize, now I understand what he was saying, or now I understand what the Rebbe or the Maimer or the Gemara was saying. That happens throughout. But Adaita the Rabbe, that's where you really come to a point. There's the expression also in Chassidus, Chushei HaTalmid kechushei harav, that you actually become like your Rav. Not just you understand him, you can actually become and even surpass him. for that matter. Because the details, a good teacher will do that. Every detail carries everything in it. The Rebbe very, very often fondly repeating the Friedrich Rebbe's word, that the whole Torah is included in Aseres HaDibros. Aseres HaDibros is included in Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Anochi Hashem Elokecha is included in Anochi. And the whole Anochi is included in the Aleph. So when you teach a child Aleph, you're teaching them really that Aleph has Anochi, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Aseres HaDibros, and the whole Torah within one Aleph. It's the idea of like a hologram in a way, where that even a drop of water reflects the entire sun, just like the Pacific Ocean does. It's all there, except the question is whether we're there. So going back to the interface, yes, Atzmus has embedded all the levels, the highest and lowest levels, in one dot. However, we are not there yet. So we start with one dot, two dots, three dots, and then you start connecting the dots. Connecting the dots, by the way, is another way of saying using the kav, which is made of dots, to get to ultimately connecting the dots and seeing the bigger picture. If you want a real visualization, the story of Purim took 9 years, 9 years, they say. Right? It says 9 years. From the beginning, Vahi b'me'ach Shverish, till the end, was 9 years. If you lived through the time, you wouldn't see a miracle happening. You'd see a bunch of events, seemingly random events. Achashverosh happens to become king. He happens to throw a party. Vashti happens not to show up. He gets angry, has her killed. Mordechai hears Bixen B'Seresh. The plot, what's that connected to anything? We don't know yet. Haman rises up against the Jews. The plot, the conspiracy, etc. Genocide. Achashverosh happens to be looking for a bride. He happens to find Esther, who happens to be Mordechai's niece, or Mordechai, however you explain what she is. He doesn't know. Then he happens to have insomnia one night. Complete. It's a sleepless night. How does that relate? But because of that, they bring the Divrei Hayamim. They read. I mean, what do you see here? If you were a journalist living through those years, many of these things have no connection to one another, a bunch of disjointed events. Then you start saying, oh, 1 second, something's happening. All of it comes together because the Divrei Hayamim, he had that sleepless night, and they read about Mordechai's heroism, saving the king. King wants to reward him. And the rest, you know the story. And ultimately, it all comes together, that all these dots. So if you're living through the dots, you're living through this, like the story of Ashgacha Pratis. When you're living at the moment, you have no idea what the big picture is. You can believe there's a bigger picture, but you may not see it at all. As you begin to step back, or you look backwards in retrospect, you say, 1 second here. It's a complete miracle. It's not a miracle like Kriyas Yamsuf, everyone saw the sea part. Here, the miracle worked through all these events. So there's a big picture. I mean, this is really the story of our lives. You and I, we're living right now in 2020 through a pandemic. Do we know the bigger picture? No. We know what we're going through, but we know, especially when you learn Torah and Chassidus, there is a bigger picture. There's a narrative happening here. And it didn't begin today. It began Tafshin Pei 5,780 years ago. And it's developing. When the Rebbe says Mashiach we're at the threshold of Mashiach, he means that he sees the big picture, that we're coming to a point where everything that happened is coming to a culmination. Some of us understand it, some of us don't. If you look around the world, you see technology and politics and the freedom of Jews and so many other aspects. My point is that there are details, and there's a Ratzon Kloli, a Ratzon Prati, and all the Ratzenis Pratim, a Ratzon for each level, the Ratzon for. So if you want to understand Atzilus, you need to know the details of Atzilus. I'm talking now going back to the artist or the teacher. The details of Atzilus is Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Seid, Malchus. But is that it? No. There's a Ratzon for Atzilus. What's the Kavana? What's the Ratzon Kloli, L'fiyerech? What's the Igulim of Atzilus? Kesed, Atik, and Arich. What's the purpose, the vision for Atzilus? What is Chachma, Bina, Das? When you connect all those 10 spheres, what are they coming to fulfill? So Kesed answers the question. The Igulim of Atzilus tell you, the artist that created Atzilus, this is the specific desire, what he wants Atzilus for. To give an example, we learned earlier in Ayin Beis, Atzilus comes to give us an ability to understand and to feel God. Without Atzilus, we don't have that ability. Then the next question, in the piece of art, we suddenly see a Bria emerge. Bria has also Chochmah through Malchus. What's Bria's kavanah? So Ratzon will tell you. The Ratzon for Bria envisions what Bria is going to be. It implements, the Kav implements it, but the Kav is carrying the Ratzon into every specific detail. So Chochmah of Bria is informed by Ratzon of Bria, of Keser. And same Yitzira, same with Asiya, and the same with Ak. Each one has a different Ratzon. Now, if you look at it, it says in some places that all the Ksarim Nishtalshlim Zemizeh, all the Ritzainus connect, because since the desire for Atzilus, that's the specific part. Like that's, you could say that's like when the artist is painting the heaven, the sky. Then he's coming to Bria, he's painting now the trees. He's coming to Yitziri, he's painting another section. Each one has its kavanah, its ratzon, but then there's a ratzon kloli for the whole thing, and all the ritzainus in each dimension connect to the ratzon kloli, which takes you back to the Igul HaGadol and all the way to the ratzon lifnei hatzimtzum, ratzon hakodum, or we spoke earlier. We're going to speak more about this a little later. The different levels of ratzon, all the way back to the way God envisioned it. So if you go from the top, God envisioned the whole thing and desired the whole thing. First, it was just a determination. Then it became a specific relationship, pursuit. He's pursuing now, and the ratzon is now in an active state of relating. And there are details beginning to be emerging. Then comes the implementation, the tzimtzum. The ratzon now is turning into the igulim that will inform each part of Ishtalshlus, Klolos Ishtalshlus and Ak. Each part of Ishtalshlus is the kesser of that particular dimension or world or entity. And the Pnimi, the Kav, is the carrier of it all. Everything travels through the Kav. The Kav implements it all. So that is translating it back into Ishtalshlus. If you keep this in mind, you have a whole take on what Ishtalshlus really is and what's Kesser's role and what's the role of Sfiris. The problem that many of us have is when we first learn these things, no one translated into a specific examples. You're at Kesser. Okay, there's Kesser. Kesser, I remember when I started learning Kesser, it's not a word we're used to. What is Kesser? A crown. What does a crown have to do with all this? And until you don't really internalize what Ratzon means, the desire for something, in contrast to the actual implementation of it, the Ratzon for Atzilus, and then the Ratzon for Chochmah, the Ratzon for Bina, and the way they all relate to each other, Makiv Primi, what happens is it remains words. When you learn Ayin Beis, you learn it, it's very cryptic. That's why I'm always insisting, you have to give examples you relate to. Because if you don't relate to it, what you have is, you're going to have what the Rebbe once said, a group of college students, or once in Yechidus, in Tafshin Yud, the Rebbe told the story. First year, 1950. He said, a bunch of college students came to see me, and they had notepads, and they asked me questions, questions on Torah, Chassidus, and the Rebbe, and miracles, and this and that. And then they asked this question, the Rebbe said, what is a Rebbe? And the Rebbe began to explain what a Rebbe is. And he says, the students, the Rebbe said this in the Fabrengen, the students were jotting down, taking notes, they're very aggressive notes on what the Rebbe is saying. He said, the Rebbe said, and when they left the Yechidus, I said to myself, no, now they have a paper Rebbe. A Rebbe on paper, basically. Because yes, they got the details right, meaning they wrote down what a Rebbe is, but it's a papir Rebbe. It's not a real living, breathing Rebbe. It can be on paper. And Chassidus, you could also learn on paper. You learn it. And it's tremendous, especially if you're a spiritual person, understanding the spiritual levels and the sublime, and it's abstract. And it's very geschmack. But it's a whole different thing if it's on paper or if it's in your heart, in your life. To be in your life, it has to be personal. There's no way out. There's no way around. How are you going to relate to all these levels of Lifnei HaTzimtzum and Eris and I'm sorry, the Igulim and Yesher and Kav and all that? You have to have something where you could say, here's how it's working in my life. I have my desire. I have the implementation. I have the specifics. Pnimi Makif. And by the way, not just by the way, when you live a life according to this, you'll have a very wholesome life. How many of us really live our lives that first we have a Ratzon Klali and a game plan and a big picture before we have a small picture? Most of us live from hand to mouth, here and now. You deal with the situation. This teaches you that the whole life, all of existence is meant to be informed by a big makif, by a big rotzen. And that rotzen is supposed to then travel into specifics. And everything informs each other until you have big picture, small picture, each one connecting and informing the other until you have a full harmony, what I said before, of details, diversity, harmony, and within diversity. So the Eibishter created a big world. It says, Mashiach comes, the whole world will exist, every detail, but you'll also see the whole picture. It won't be just a bunch of fragmented details and everyone's doing whatever they want to do. It'll all be part of a bigger plan, a world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. So you have a world, but it's filled with higher purpose. And that is higher purpose is another word for saying transcendence. Details is another word for saying pnimi. I mean, I can go on and on. What my goal here is really teaching you the methodology that you should be able to do this. Not that I can do this. That you should be able to take this, what we just discussed, go home and share it with your spouse, with your children, with friends. Share it in your own way. When you do that and in a personal way, you'll see you'll have a whole different way of understanding it. That's the key. This has to come alive. It only comes alive through us. If not, it remains theories. As I said, theories, mathematics, mechanics, physics, spiritual physics, metaphysics, and on paper. And there's a way of bringing it alive in a Torah Meloshon Hira that it becomes, what does it mean to me personally? That's what I've been trying to do with these examples. If you have other examples, I would love to hear someone give an example, different example entirely that may illuminate us all. So that's the goal here. This was not planned today to go in this type of way, but you know what? We're learning this. Might as well learn it to the fullest, and not to the least, but the most. So we'll try my best here. Okay, that was a mouthful, right?
Yeah, it was very good. Shkoach.
Oh.
Very special.
Thank you.